She took my passport out of my hands, smiled at me, and walked away. Right there. Dubai International Airport. Gate 14. I watched my daughter disappear into that crowd, and I realized she wasn't coming back. No phone, no money, no ID. 69 years old, alone in a foreign country. And the one person I gave everything to had just erased me from her life like I never existed. What happened next, what a stranger did for me in the next 48 hours, changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and what it means to finally stop surviving and start living. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if no one's told you lately, subscribe. Because this one goes all the way to the end. I want to tell you something before I begin. I am not a dramatic woman. I never was. For 69 years, I was the quiet one, the steady one, the one who held everything together while everyone else fell apart. I made coffee before anyone else woke up. I ironed shirts nobody thanked me for, worrying about people who never once lost sleep over me. My name is Margaret Ellis. And I need you to understand who I was before Dubai, because who I became after is the whole point of this story. I was a hotel manager for 35 years. Not the front desk kind. Every hinge on every door. Every staff member's mother's name. Every guest who came back year after year because they felt seen. I built careers. I solved crises at 2 in the morning without waking the guests. I once talked a man out of leaving his wife in the lobby of the Meridian Grand in Cincinnati just by listening. I was good at my job. The moment I retired, I disappeared. Not from the world. The world kept spinning just fine without me. I disappeared from my own life, from the version of myself that mattered. My husband, Robert, died 4 years before that trip to Dubai. Heart attack. 67 years old. Everyone said at the funeral, as if there's ever an age that makes it easier. After Robert, I moved into a smaller apartment, kept my plants alive, called my daughter every Sunday, and told myself that this quiet, careful, small life was enough. I told myself that for 4 years, and I almost believed it. The Dubai trip was Olivia's idea. That's the first thing I need you to understand. She called me on a Tuesday in March and said, "Mom, I want to take you somewhere. Somewhere you've never been. I need us to have a real trip together, just the two of us." I almost dropped the phone. Olivia and I had not taken a trip together since she was 17 years old. We spoke every week, yes. Thanksgiving dinners and birthday calls, and the occasional Sunday lunch where we were careful, so careful not to say the wrong thing to each other. We had the shape of a mother and daughter relationship. We had the schedule of closeness, but we didn't have the real thing. There was always something between us. Wall I could feel but never quite see. Distance in her eyes when she looked at me, not anger exactly. Not coldness exactly, something more complicated. Something I had been trying to reach through for years without knowing what was on the other side. So when she said Dubai, I said yes before she finished the sentence. "Are you sure, Mom?" she asked. "It's a long flight." "For this trip," I said. "I can handle 14 hours on a plane." She laughed. She sounded like the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I was the bravest person in the world. I should have held on to that sound. I should have bottled it. Because that was the last time Olivia laughed like that with me. I flew into Dubai on a Thursday morning. I remember the city from above, the way it rose out of the desert, like someone had dreamed it into existence. Glass towers catching sunlight, highways like silver ribbons, blue and enormous, running along the edge of all that ambition. "It's something, isn't it?" I said, pressing my face to the window like a child. Olivia glanced over from the aisle seat. "It's impressive. she said, in the voice she used for business presentations. Well, impressive. Not beautiful. Well, not breathtaking. Well, impressive. Well, I let it go. We checked into our hotel, a beautiful place. Well, marble floors. Well, fresh flowers at reception. The kind of lobby that made you stand up straighter just walking through it. Olivia had booked separate rooms. Well, I told myself that was fine. We were grown women. We didn't need to share. The first 2 days were good. Well, or good enough. We visited the spice souk. In the morning I bought saffron and cardamom and laughed at a vendor who tried to sell me a camel figurine the size of my arm. We took a boat across the creek, grilled fish at a little restaurant by the water, and Olivia told me about her work, the promotions, all the contracts, all the European clients, and I listened. Well, I always listened. Well, on the second evening, she asked me about Robert. I should have seen that as a warning. Well, did he ever tell you he was unhappy? Well, she asked. We were sitting on the hotel terrace. The sun was going down. Sky was that particular shade of orange that makes everything look softer than it is. What do you mean? Well, I said carefully. Well, with his life. With everything. Well, did he ever say he wished things had been different? Olivia minus. Well, just answer the question, Mom. Well, I looked at my daughter, this polished, well, successful, 42-year-old woman with her expensive haircut and her careful posture, and I saw something underneath all of it. Well, something raw, something that had been living there for a long time. Your father had a complicated life. Well, I said slowly. Well, he had struggles. Well, but he loved you. Well, he loved us. Well, that's not what I asked. Well, I reached for my water glass. Well, then maybe it's the only answer I have right now. Well, she looked away. And we didn't speak again until dinner. Well, day 3 is when everything unraveled. Started small the way disasters usually do. We were in line at the airport for our return flight home. Well, we'd arrived early. Well, checked our bags. Well, and were standing at the self-check-in kiosk when Olivia noticed the seating. You put us in different rows, she said. I booked what was available, I said. Olivia, well, I wanted an aisle seat because of my hip. Well, I asked you to book us together. Well, I know. Well, but by the time I got to it, well, by the time you got to it, well, she repeated the words back to me, and something in her tone changed. Well, you always do this. Well, I turned to look at her. Do what? Well, make everything about what you need. Your hip. Well, your comfort. Your minus. Olivia, I kept my voice very calm. It's a seat on an airplane. It's never just a seat. Well, Mom, her voice was rising now. Well, people nearby were beginning to glance over. Well, it's every time. Well, every single time. Well, I planned this trip. I organized every detail. Well, and you. Well, I booked our return flights. Well, that's all I did. Well, you never once asked me what I needed. Well, her voice cracked on the last word. Well, not once in my entire life did you ask what I actually needed. Well, I stood very still. I worked double shifts to buy you your first car. Well, I skipped my own dental appointments to pay for your college applications. I sat in the hospital alone the night your father was diagnosed because I didn't want to scare you before the results came in. Every single morning for 23 years I packed your lunch and told myself someday you'd understand. Well, I wanted to say all of that. But I was 69 years old, and I had learned painfully, slowly, at great cost, that responding to anger with truth in the wrong moment never helped anything. Well, so I said, well, can we talk about this somewhere private? Well, no, she said. Well, I don't want to talk about it. And she walked away from the kiosk, stood there for a moment, let out a long, slow breath. Then I stepped up to the screen and began checking in. Booking number. No reservation found. Well, I tried again. Well, same number. Well, same result. Well, I checked my email on my phone, my old phone, well, the one with the cracked screen, and looked for the confirmation Olivia had forwarded me when she booked the flight. The confirmation was there. But when I clicked through to the airline website, the reservation status said one word. Cancelled. My throat closed. I looked around for Olivia. She was 20 feet away, near the departures board, her back to me. Her phone was in her hand. She was typing something, and even from that distance, even with my heart starting to beat too fast and my hands starting to shake, I watched her put her phone into her bag and exhale the long, deliberate exhale of someone who has just finished a task. Olivia. She turned around. My reservation is canceled, I said. I know, she said, those 2 words. I know. What do you mean you know? My voice sounded very far away. Did you do? She looked at me, and I want to describe this to you because I want you to understand what I saw. It wasn't rage. It wasn't cruelty, not the obvious kind. It was something worse. It was relief. I canceled it. Mom, she said. I think you need to figure some things out on your own. I couldn't finish the sentence. Olivia, I'm 69 years old. I'm in a foreign country. I don't. You'll figure it out. She picked up her carry-on. You always do. My passport documents. They're in the folder I gave you. I reached into my bag. The folder was there. Copies she had made the international insurance card, emergency contact sheet she'd prepared, the hotel records, all of it was gone. She had taken it from the folder sometime in the night. Remained was my actual passport and $40 in cash that I'd kept folded in my wallet since we left home. Olivia, I grabbed her arm. Please. Please don't do this. She looked down at my hand on her arm. Then she looked up at me. Let go, she said quietly. And something in her voice, the flatness of it, the terrifying calm, made me release her. She walked through security. I watched her until she disappeared. Stood at that airport kiosk for I don't know how long. Long enough for the line to move around me. Stroller to ask me gently if I was all right. Long enough for my legs to start feeling like they belonged to someone else. Then I did the only logical thing I could think of. I went to the airline desk. The young woman behind the counter was polite and patient. She pulled up my name. She confirmed that yes, the reservation had been canceled online less than an hour ago. There was no easy rebooking. The flight was full. The next available seat on a direct flight to the United States was in 4 days. The cost to rebook, $840. I had $40. Is there a supervisor I can speak with? I asked. She brought one. He was also polite. Also patient. He explained the cancellation policy. He explained that because it had been canceled online by the passenger or by an authorized person in your party, there was no compensation available. Can I speak with someone from customer services? From the airport. He gave me a number. I looked down at my phone. The battery was at 6%. I didn't have a charger. Olivia had been charging her phone from my charger in the hotel room the night before, and she'd packed it with her things that morning. I asked the man if there was somewhere I could charge my phone. He pointed me toward a charging station near Gate 7. I walked there, plugged in my phone, sat down on a plastic seat in the most beautiful, modern, overwhelming airport I had ever been in my life, and I thought, what do I do? I ran through every option I could think of with the same methodical calm I had used to run a hotel for 35 years. Call someone. My phone would last 3 more minutes. I had Olivia's number memorized. My friend Linda's number, but Linda was in Columbus, Ohio, and even if I reached her, what could she do? Go to the American consulate. I didn't know where it was or how to get there. I had $40. Ask the airport for help. I had tried that. They had given me phone numbers. Find a hotel and figure it out. With $40 in Dubai. Every option dissolved before I could hold on to it. And that's when the fear came. Not the sharp, sudden fear of a car accident or a loud noise. The slow kind. The creeping kind. The kind that starts in your chest and moves outward until it reaches your hands and your throat and the backs of your eyes. I was 69 years old. I was alone. I was in a country where I did not speak the language, did not know the geography, did not have enough money to last the day. And the only person in the world who knew where I was had walked through a security gate and chosen not to look back. I sat in that plastic chair, and for the first time in 40 years since the night Robert told me we were losing the house, and I held myself together in the bathroom. So Olivia wouldn't hear me cry, I let myself fall apart. Not loudly. I wasn't raised to cry loudly in public. But the tears came, and I didn't stop them. I put my hands in my lap, and I looked at the floor, and I cried the way very old grief comes quietly, completely, like water finding its level. Excuse me. The voice was calm, unhurried. The voice of someone who was not in a rush and was not going to pretend otherwise. I looked up. He was a tall man, older, perhaps my age, perhaps slightly older, with silver hair and dark eyes, and the kind of face that had spent a lot of time outdoors. He was dressed simply. A light jacket, dark trousers, no flashy watch, no obvious wealth, except for the way he held himself, the way very secure people hold themselves, like the ground beneath them is always solid. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to me. I stared at it. I am not trying to alarm you, he said. I was sitting there. He nodded toward a seat across the walkway, and I could see that something was wrong. I thought coffee might help, or might not help, but I had 2 cups and nowhere pressing to be. My voice came out wrong. I cleared my throat. I don't take things from strangers. That is a very sensible policy, he said, and sat down in the seat beside mine, not close, not crowding me, just present. He set his own cup on his knee. I have a sensible policy myself. I don't sit down next to crying women in airports and offer them coffee unless I genuinely have nowhere to be and nothing I want except to make sure they're all right. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I took the coffee. It was good coffee, strong, with cardamom, the kind that reminds you the world still has small, good things in it. My name is Adrian, he said. Adrian Khalil. Margaret, I said. Margaret Ellis. Margaret, he nodded, as if placing it somewhere. Can I ask, and please tell me if it is none of my business? Because it likely isn't. Is there someone coming for you? Or are you in the kind of trouble that requires a different conversation? I almost laughed. Almost law surprised me so much that I did laugh, a small, cracked sound that was partly grief and partly absurdity. There's no one coming, I said. My daughter just canceled my flight home and left me here. He was quiet for a moment. How long ago? He asked. 20 minutes. Maybe half an hour. He looked down at his coffee. Something moved across his face, not pity, which I would have hated. Something more like recognition. You said your daughter, he said carefully. Only daughter. She's 42. We came here together. I paused. She had her reasons. I'm sure she had her reasons. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and said something I did not expect. You're defending her. She's my daughter. Yes, he said. I know that feeling. Something in the way he said it, the weight of it, the exact specific weight, made me look back at him. I have a son, he said simply, and left it there. We sat together for a moment in silence. The airport moved around us, announcements in Arabic and English, families wheeling luggage, children running ahead of their parents. How much cash do you have? He asked. Practical. Direct. Not unkind. $40. And your phone? Well, 6% battery. Well, possibly 3 by now. He reached into his jacket and produced a charging cable. Different adapter, I said. Well, he looked at it, looked at my phone. Well, then he stood, walked to the other side of the charging station, and came back 30 seconds later with a universal adapter that someone had apparently left plugged into one of the ports. Well, people leave these everywhere, he said, plugging in my phone. One of the genuine kindnesses of modern airports. Well, I watched my phone screen brighten. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Well, he sat back down. 12 years ago, he said, my wife was alone in an airport in London. Well, our son had told her he would pick her up. Well, and he didn't come. She was there for 4 hours before I reached her. Well, he paused. Well, she never fully recovered from that humiliation. Not because of what happened, she was a strong woman, but because it was her son who did it. Well, and no one stopped to help her. Well, he looked at me. Well, I have had 12 years to wish that someone had. Well, I held my coffee cup in both hands. "Sorry about your wife," I said. "Well, she died 2 years later," he said. "Well, illness. Well, not related to the airport. I've always thought those 4 hours alone in Heathrow cost her something she never got back. Well, and I swore, well, after that, well, that I would not walk past a person in that kind of trouble." Well, he said it without drama, without asking for credit. The way you say something that is simply, well, finally, true. "Well, I have a car outside." Well, he continued. "Well, I have a driver. I also have, this is perhaps too much information, for the first 5 minutes of an acquaintance, I have 12 guest suites that are currently empty. Well, my company owns hotels, Mrs. Well, Ellis. Well, I am not short of space. And I am not," he said this with careful emphasis, "I am not the kind of man who offers hospitality in order to take something in return. Well, if that is your concern." "It's always a concern," I said. "Well, for women my age, especially in foreign countries." "Well, that is also sensible," he said. "Well, so let me suggest this. Well, there is a concierge desk on the other side of this terminal. Well, American consulate contact. International passenger assistance. Well, we will go there together. You will speak to them. You will know exactly what your options are. You decide. Well, on your own, without my involvement in the decision." I looked at this man, this stranger, with his silver hair and his two cups of coffee and his 12 empty guest suites, and I thought about every moment in my life when someone had offered to help me, and I had said, "No, thank you. Well, I'm fine," because I had been trained to say that from birth. I thought about the hotel lobby in Cincinnati and the man whose marriage I'd talked back together simply by listening. Thought about 35 years of managing crises at 2 in the morning. I thought about Olivia's face as she walked away from me. And I thought, you have $40 and a cracked screen phone, and you are 69 years old, and it is 5 in the afternoon in a city you do not know. What, exactly, are you going to prove by saying no? "Well, all right," I said. "Let's go to the concierge desk." Well, the consulate contact took 40 minutes. Well, the woman I spoke with, a patient American named Janet, who had clearly handled situations like mine before, walked me through my options with efficient kindness. Well, I could file a report. Well, I could apply for emergency funds through a specific program. Well, the process would take between 3 and 5 business days. Well, 3 to 5 business days with $40. Well, when we walked away from the desk, well, Adrian looked at me. 3 to 5 days, he said. Well, 3 to 5 days. Well, and in the meantime, pressed my lips together. In the meantime, well, I suppose I need to find a very inexpensive option. Well, or a free one, he said. Well, which I have already offered. Well, I studied him for a moment longer than was probably polite. "Really own hotels," I said. "Well, I really do." "Well, which ones?" Well, he named 3. Well, I knew 2 of them, knew their reputations, knew the level of service they maintained. "Well, you're that Adrian Khalil," I said. Well, he looked slightly amused. "Well, is there another one?" Meridian Properties for 20 years. I knew the Khalil name. Not personally, we operated in different leagues, but professionally. His company had a reputation for exceptional staff retention, genuine hospitality philosophy, quality that comes from the top. Properties have a staff turnover rate of 4%, I said almost to myself. He raised an eyebrow. You know that number. I know that number because mine was 3.5, and I was proud of it. 4% is extraordinary for the industry. Something changed in his expression. Not much, but something. You're in hospitality, he said. I was in hospitality, I said. I retired. How long? 35 years. Hotel management. Mostly Meridian Properties, Ohio and Indiana. Quiet for a moment in a way that felt purposeful. Mrs. Ellis, he said, I am going to say something that may sound strange, given that we have known each other for approximately 1 hour. Go ahead. I think you and I may have something to discuss, beyond your current situation. He paused. But first things first. First things first, I agreed. The car was a dark sedan, not a limousine. Not anything ostentatious. Just a well-maintained car with a driver named Samir who greeted me with a small, formal nod and held the door without making me feel like a charity case. Drove along the waterfront as the sun finished setting. Sat in the back seat of a stranger's car in a foreign city with $40 in my wallet and my heart still beating in that wrong, dislocated way, and I noticed that I was not, in that moment, afraid. I was something else entirely. I was angry. The fear had done its work and moved through me like weather, and what it left behind sitting there in the seat, watching Dubai light up in the dark, was a clean, clarifying anger. Not at the situation, at myself. 69 years of stepping back, of making myself smaller, of packing my needs into a box and pushing them under the bed so other people could have more room. I thought of Olivia's voice at the kiosk. You never once asked me what I needed. And I thought, you never once asked me either. The thought surprised me with its sharpness, because it was true. And it was the first time in my life I had let myself think it without immediately drowning it in guilt. We pulled through a gate and up a long driveway. The residence was not what I expected. Elegant but not enormous. A home, not a compound. Lit from within. Samir opened the door. I stepped out. Welcome, said Adrian Khalil, to the most honest house in Dubai. How I think of it. My wife insisted on that. I looked at the house. What did she mean by that? I asked. She meant that nothing here pretends, he said. Not the furniture, not the food, not the people. He held the door open. I walked in. And somewhere behind me, in the direction of the airport, my daughter was on a plane flying home believing, I am sure, that she had left behind the version of me she'd always known. Didn't know what I didn't know yet either. Not fully was that woman was already gone. The woman who walked through that door was someone else. Someone who, for the first time in 69 years, had no idea what came next, and felt, despite everything, dangerously, terrifyingly, unexpectedly alive. I stepped past Adrian into that house, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the furniture or the high ceilings or the smell of something warm cooking somewhere out of sight. It was the quiet. Didn't feel empty. Felt like a room that had been waited in, cared for, kept ready. Sit, Adrian said, gesturing toward a low couch near tall windows that looked out over dark water. Please. Most people in half. I'm not broken, I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me with something like approval. No, he said. I don't think you are. A woman appeared from the hallway, younger, maybe 50, dressed simply, with kind eyes and quick hands. Adrian said something to her in Arabic. Well, she nodded and disappeared again. Well, that's Farah, he said. She runs this house better than I run my company. Well, she's gone to prepare a room for you, well, and something to eat. Well, because I suspect you haven't eaten today. Well, I hadn't. I realized it the moment he said it, that hollow feeling under the panic, well, the one I'd been too afraid to notice. Well, you don't have to do all this, I said. No, I don't have to. He sat across from me, well, not too close. That's rather the point of doing it. Down at my hands. Well, they were shaking, well, just slightly. Well, the adrenaline finally draining out of me now that I wasn't standing in an airport fighting to hold myself together. Well, I keep waiting to wake up. Well, I said quietly. Morning, I was arguing with my daughter about airplane seats. Tonight I'm sitting in the home of a man I met 4 hours ago because she left me with $40 and no way home. Small thing to survive in one day. Adrian said. Well, I haven't survived it yet, I said. Well, I'm still in it. He didn't argue with that. He just let it sit there, well, honest, between us. Farah came back with tea and a plate of flatbread and something rich and warm that smelled like cumin and lemon. Well, I ate slowly, well, carefully, well, the way you eat when your body has forgotten it's allowed to want something. Well, Mrs. Well, Ellis, Adrian said, well, once Farah had gone again. I want to ask you something, well, and I want you to feel entirely free to say no. Well, go ahead. I mentioned at the airport that you and I might have something to discuss beyond tonight. I wasn't simply making conversation. Well, he leaned forward slightly. I have a business problem. Well, a real one. Well, and I think, well, strangely, that you might be exactly the person who could help me with it. Well, I set down my tea. I appreciate everything you've done for me today. Well, I do. Well, but I'm not looking for a job. Well, I'm looking for a plane ticket home. Well, I understand that, he said. Well, and I will help you get one, well, regardless of what you decide about anything else. Well, that is not conditional. Well, I want to be very clear about that. Then why offer? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words the way careful men do. 6 months ago, my wife's brother, who sits on my board, began questioning whether I'm still fit to lead this company, he said. Since Yasmin died, he's told the other partners I've lost my instincts, that grief has made me sentimental, weak in negotiations. He wants to push through an international expansion deal that I believe is reckless. Well, and he's using my mourning as evidence that I shouldn't be the one to stop him. Well, that's cruel, I said. Well, it's business, he said, though something in his voice suggested he didn't fully believe his own words. Well, but here is my problem. Well, in 11 days, well, I have a board meeting where I need to present an alternative to his expansion plan. Something that proves I still understand this industry. Something built on real hospitality principles, well, not just spreadsheets. Well, he looked at me. I need someone who has actually run hotels, who understands staff, well, and guests, and what makes an establishment survive its first hard year. Well, I have executives. Anyone who's stood behind a front desk at 2 a.m. talking a man out of leaving his marriage. Well, I stared at him. Well, how did you know about that? Didn't, he said, well, surprised. Guessing at the kind of thing someone with your experience might have done. Did that actually happen? Well, I let out a short laugh despite everything. It did. Well, Cincinnati. Well, 2003. Well, then you understand exactly what I'm asking for. Well, he held my gaze. Well, I'm not offering you charity, Mrs. Well, Ellis. Well, I'm offering you work. Well, real work. Well, for real pay. Because I think you might save my company something my accountants can't. Well, I sat with that for a long moment. Every instinct in me, 35 years of training, 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of being told that a woman my age should be grateful for whatever attention she still received, told me to say I couldn't possibly. But another voice, quieter and newer, One that had only been born a few hours ago in a plastic airport chair, said something else entirely. "Well, what would you need from me?" I asked. Adrian smiled, the first full smile I'd seen from him. "Just your mind," he said. "Well, for 11 days. Well, after that, you're free to fly home the moment your ticket is ready. Well, no obligation." Well, I thought about Olivia, somewhere over the Atlantic by now, believing she'd left behind a helpless old woman who would spend the next several days crying in an airport lounge. "Well, all right," I said. "Well, 11 days. Well, I want to tell you what happened over the next few days. Well, because I think this is the part of the story people don't expect. They expect the drama. Well, they expect the confrontation. Well, what they don't expect is how ordinary, well, how human the healing actually was. The first morning, Adrian's assistant, a sharp young woman named Priya, arrived at 7 with a folder 3 inches thick, floor plans, staffing reports, guest satisfaction surveys, 5 years of financial data from the property they were considering for expansion in Marrakesh. "Well, Mr. Irvan, Khalil said you'd want to see everything," she said, setting it in front of me like a challenge. I hadn't held a spreadsheet in 4 years. Well, my hands actually trembled when I opened the folder. "Coffee?" Priya asked. "Well, please," I said. "Well, strong." Well, by 9 in the morning, I had found it. Well, buried on page 41 of the staffing report. Well, a pattern so obvious I couldn't understand how a team of executives had missed it. "Well, Adrian," I said, when he came down for the mid-morning meeting, "your brother-in-law's expansion plan has a fatal problem." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, which is budgeting the Marrakesh property with staffing ratios copied directly from your Dubai flagship. Marrakesh's guest demographic skews toward extended-stay business travelers, not tourists. Double the concierge staff and half the housekeeping turnover he's projected. Well, if you launch with his numbers, you'll have furious guests within the first 6 weeks and a staff exodus within 6 months. Well, I've seen this exact mistake sink 2 properties I know of personally." Well, the room went quiet. "You found that in 2 hours," Adrian said. "Well, I found that in 2 hours because I lived it," I said. 2011, a regional director tried the same shortcut at our Louisville property. Well, we lost 11 senior staff in 90 days. It took us 2 years to recover our reputation." Adrian looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in his face. Respect. Well, unguarded and real. "Well, Priya," he said, without looking away from me, "clear my schedule for the next week." "Well, Mrs. Ellis and I have work to do." I won't pretend those days were simple. They weren't. There were moments. Alone in the guest room, Farah had prepared for me. When the fear came back sharp and sudden, the way it does at 3 in the morning when the whole house is asleep and there's no one to perform strength for, I would lie there and think, I am in a stranger's house on the other side of the world, and my own daughter did this to me. I would think about calling her. I would pick up my phone, scroll to her name, and put the phone back down. Because every time I imagined that call, I imagined her voice flat, unbothered, already rehearsing the story she'd tell people about her difficult mother, and I couldn't do it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear her make me small again. On the 3rd night, I finally called my friend Linda in Columbus. Her voice cracked with relief the second she picked up. "Oh my God. Margaret, where have you been? Olivia called me 2 days ago and told me you'd wandered off at the Dubai airport, that she'd been trying to reach you, that she was worried sick." I felt something cold settle in my chest. She said, "I wandered off." I repeated. She said you two had an argument and you stormed away from the gate before your flight and she couldn't find you anywhere. Filed a report with the airport." My voice was very steady. Too steady. "Olivia canceled my return flight. She took my documents, walked through security, and left me standing there with $40. Silence on the line. Well, that's not Linda started. Well, Margaret, that's not what she told me. Well, I know it's not, I said. Well, because it's not what happened. Well, there was a long pause, and I could hear Linda breathing, working through what I'd just told her against 40 years of knowing Olivia as the golden child, the one who always had a reasonable explanation. Are you safe right now? Linda finally asked, and I could hear real fear in her voice now. Well, I'm safe, I said. Well, I'm safer than I've been in years, actually. That's the strange part. Well, I told her everything. Well, Adrian. Well, the house. Well, the job. Well, all of it. Linda listened without interrupting, which for Linda was practically a miracle. Well, she's telling people you're confused, Linda said quietly, well, when I finished. She's telling people you might be Margaret. She used the word episode. Well, she said you might be having some kind of episode. Well, the floor seemed to tilt slightly under me. Well, she's building a story, well, I said slowly. Well, understanding arriving in pieces, well, like ice cracking. Well, she's not just covering what she did. Well, she's laying groundwork. Well, groundwork for what? I thought about Robert's will. The modest savings account I still held in my name alone. Olivia had tried to start 6 months ago about getting my affairs organized. Well, just in case. I think my daughter might be trying to make people believe I'm losing my mind, I said. So that, later, well, if I try to tell anyone what she actually did in that airport, no one will believe me. Linda didn't say anything for a long moment. Well, Margaret, she finally said, well, I believe you. But you need to be careful. If she's already telling people that story back here, you need proof of what actually happened over there. Well, I looked around the quiet, lamp-lit room, the folder of financial reports still open on the desk, the life I had somehow stumbled into in the space of 72 hours. Well, I think, I said slowly, well, I'm about to get some. The next morning I asked Adrian a question I hadn't planned to ask. Does your hotel keep security footage from the arrivals lounge? Well, from 4 days ago. He looked up from his coffee, surprised by the shift in subject. Well, the airport does. Well, certainly. Well, why? Well, I told him what Linda had said. Well, watched his expression change from curiosity to something harder, well, more focused. She's telling people you're unwell, well, he repeated, well, very quietly. Well, she's telling people I wandered off, well, that I might be confused, well, that she's worried about me. I felt my hands curl into fists in my lap. Not just protecting herself, Adrian. She's preparing for a fight. Well, and I don't even know what the fight is about yet. He set down his cup with deliberate care, the way a man does when he's controlling his own anger. I know someone at the airport authority, he said. Well, old friend. I can request the footage from the terminal cameras near Gate 14 for that afternoon. Well, it won't take long. You do that. It was the first time he'd used my first name without the Mrs. Ellis in front of it, and it landed differently than I expected. Someone tried to erase you from your own life in an airport terminal 4 days ago. Well, I am not going to stand by while she tries to erase what actually happened, too. Well, by that evening, we had it. Well, Adrian's assistant pulled up the footage on a laptop at the kitchen table, and I watched my stomach twisting as the grainy black and white recording showed Olivia at the kiosk, showed her typing, showed her glancing over her shoulder toward me, once, twice, checking, showed her sliding the folder of documents out of my open bag while I was distracted at the check-in screen, showed her walking away, unhurried, checking her phone, exactly as I remembered it. There, Priya said quietly, pausing the frame. Timestamp shows the cancellation request went through from a mobile device 11 minutes before you approached the kiosk. She canceled it before the argument even started. I felt the air leave my lungs. Before, I whispered. Before, Priya confirmed. I sat back in my chair. Everything I had told myself for 4 days that this was a moment of temper, an explosion born from an old argument about seats. Something spontaneous and forgivable collapsed in an instant. "Well, she planned this," I said. "Well, she planned this before we even got to the airport." Well, Adrian's hand found my shoulder, well, steady and warm. "Well, Margaret." "Well, she planned it." Well, I said again, well, louder this time, well, the words tearing something loose in my chest. Wasn't an accident of anger. Well, this was a decision. My daughter decided to leave me stranded in a foreign country with no money. Well, and then she flew home and told people I wandered off because I was confused. So fast the chair scraped hard against the floor. Well, I walked to the window and stood there, shaking, staring out at lights I didn't recognize in a city I'd never planned to know this well. "Well, why?" I said. "Well, to no one, to the glass, to the ocean beyond it." "Well, why would she do this to me?" Nobody answered. Well, because nobody in that room could. Somewhere underneath the fury, well, a colder, older question was already forming, one that would take me weeks to fully understand. Well, what does Olivia think I did to her? Well, that this felt like justice. I didn't sleep much that night. Well, I kept replaying every Sunday phone call for the past 4 years, searching for the crack I must have missed. Well, somewhere in there, well, I thought, must be the moment this all started. Couldn't find it. Well, by morning, well, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to call Olivia. Well, not yet. Well, not out of fear, out of strategy. If she was building a story to protect herself, then I needed the full truth before I gave her the chance to bend it again. Well, I threw myself into the work instead, well, because work was the one thing in the last 4 years that had never once betrayed me. Well, the board meeting was 8 days away, and the deeper I went into Adrian's company's numbers, well, the more I realized just how much trouble he was actually in. Brother-in-law's name is on 40% of the board's proxy votes. Well, I told him on the 5th day, spreading printouts across the long dining table like a battlefield map. He doesn't need to convince the whole board his expansion plan is right. He just needs to convince 3 more people that you're not fit to say no to it. Well, Adrian rubbed his temple. Well, Malik has been circling this position since Yasmin's funeral. Well, I know what he's doing. Well, then why haven't you fought back? Well, he looked at me, well, and for the first time since I'd met him, well, I saw exhaustion underneath the composure reel, bone-deep exhaustion. Well, because some days, he said quietly, well, I wonder if he's right. I wonder if grief did slow me down. I built this company with Yasmin at my side for 31 years. Margaret. I don't know how to run it without hearing her voice telling me what she'd have done. Well, I recognized that feeling instantly. I had lived inside it for 4 years. "Well, Adrian," I said, "well, grief doesn't make you weak. Well, it makes you careful. Well, there's a difference. And anyone who's actually run something real knows it." Well, I tapped the report in front of him. "You didn't miss the flaw in Malik's numbers because you're distracted. You missed it because you hired people who told you what you wanted to hear instead of what you needed to know. Well, that's not grief. Well, that's bad staffing. Well, and I happen to know exactly how to fix bad staffing." Something in his face eased, well, just slightly. "Well, you sound like Yasmin," he said. "She used to talk to me exactly like that. Well, no patience for self-pity." "Well, I've had 4 years of self-pity," I said. "Well, believe me, well, I understand the appeal. Just don't have any more room for it right now." Well, he almost smiled. "Then let's get to work." Well, we worked past midnight that night, well, and most nights after. How to build a staffing model from the ground up. Well, I rewrote 3 sections of the Marrakesh proposal myself, replacing Malik's numbers with real projections built from 35 years of watching hotels succeed and fail. Adrian sat across from me at that table night after night. Somewhere in the exhaustion and the coffee and the late arguments over spreadsheet formulas, something began to grow between us that neither of us named out loud. It wasn't romance. Well, not yet. It was something quieter and, well, in its own way, well, more dangerous. Well, it was being seen. Well, on the seventh night, well, everything cracked open at once. Well, my phone rang at 11:15. Olivia's name lit up the screen for the first time in 4 days. Well, my hand froze over the phone. Well, Adrian looked up from his laptop. Well, you don't have to answer that. Well, I know, I said, well, and answered it anyway. Olivia's voice came through fast. Well, breathless. Well, nothing like the flat calm at the airport. Well, Mom, thank God. Well, I've been calling the hotel. Well, I've been calling everyone. Linda said you were staying with someone in Dubai. Well, is that true? Well, are you safe? I've been out of my mind with worry. Well, I'm safe, I said. Well, where are you? Well, why didn't you call me? Well, I filed a missing persons report. Well, Mom, I had the embassy looking for you. Very still and very cold. Well, Olivia, I said. Well, I saw the airport security footage. Well, silence. Well, not confused silence. Well, not innocent silence. Well, the silence of someone recalculating. What are you talking about? Well, she said, and her voice had gone flat again, well, the way it had at the kiosk. You canceled my flight 11 minutes before we argued at the gate, I said. I know you planned it before we ever got to the airport. Well, I saw you take the documents out of my bag. Well, I watched the whole thing. Well, Olivia on video, time-stamped and dated. Twisting this. Well, she said quickly. Well, you're confused. Well, Mom, you don't understand what happened. Well, don't, I said. Well, and my voice cracked like a whip, sharper than I had spoken to her in 20 years. Well, don't you dare tell me I'm confused. Well, I know exactly what happened. Question is why you've spent 4 days telling everyone back home a different story. Well, because I was scared. Well, her voice broke. Well, and for a moment I couldn't tell if it was real or performance. Well, and that uncertainty itself broke something in me. Because I panicked, and I didn't know how to explain what I'd done. Well, and I didn't think you'd actually stopped herself. Well, didn't think I'd actually what? Well, I said quietly. Well, nothing. Didn't think I'd survive. Well, my voice was shaking now, but not with fear. That what you were hoping, Olivia. That I would just quietly disappear so you wouldn't have to explain yourself to anyone. Well, that is not fair. Well, she snapped. You have no idea what the last 20 years have been like for me. Carrying what I know. You know about what, I said. Say it. Whatever this is. Well, whatever's been sitting between us for 20 years. Well, say it right now. Well, because I am done guessing. Well, there was a long, ragged breath on the other end of the line. Well, ask Dad's old business partner about the Fairwood account. Well, Olivia said, well, her voice trembling. Well, ask him what really happened to our house. Well, ask him why we really moved when I was 15. Well, and then ask yourself why you never told me the truth. Well, the line went dead. Stood there in Adrian's kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone humming into the silence, and felt the entire architecture of my carefully ordered life begin, quietly and irreversibly, to fall apart. Well, Adrian was on his feet now, watching my face. Well, Margaret, what did she say? Well, I lowered the phone slowly. She said I've been lying to her for 20 years, I said. Voice came out strange, distant, like it belonged to someone standing several feet away. Well, about her father. Well, about why we moved when she was 15. Well, is that true? Well, I looked up at him. Well, and for the first time since Robert died, I let myself say the thing I had buried so deep I'd nearly convinced myself it wasn't there anymore. Yes, I whispered. Well, there's a truth I never told her. Well, and I think it's the reason she's hated me for 20 years without ever once telling me why. Well, the room went very quiet. The lights of Dubai kept burning against the dark water, indifferent to the fact that somewhere inside that beautiful, borrowed house, a woman who had spent her entire adult life protecting a secret was finally about to have to face what it had cost her. Tell me, Adrian said gently. Well, whatever it is. Well, I'm not going anywhere. I sat back down at that long table, surrounded by spreadsheets and proposals and a business crisis that suddenly felt very small. I opened my mouth to tell him about Robert, about the Fairwood account, about the house we lost, about the debt I had carried alone for 2 decades without ever once letting my daughter see the weight of it. But before I could say a single word, my phone buzzed again. Not a call this time. A message from a number I didn't recognize, forwarded from an email address I hadn't seen in 15 years, Robert's old business partner, the man Olivia had just told me to ask. The subject line read, Margaret, I think it's time you saw this. I opened it with trembling hands, and everything I thought I understood about my own marriage, my own daughter. The last 20 years of my life began to come apart in front of me on a small glowing screen. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I opened the email. It was from a man named Charles Whitfield, Robert's old business partner. The man Olivia had just told me, in a voice full of 20 years of buried anger, to go ask about something called the Fairwood account. I hadn't heard that name Charles Whitfield spoken out loud since Robert's funeral. He'd sent flowers. He hadn't come to the service himself. At the time I told myself it was because he lived out of state, because business partners drift apart, because grief makes people avoid each other for reasons that don't always make sense. Now I understood it was because he couldn't look me in the eye. Email was short. Margaret. I heard through a mutual contact that you and Olivia had some kind of falling out, and that she's been asking people questions about Robert and the business. Finally, someone told you what I know. Because I've carried this alone for 20 years, and I don't want to carry it into my own grave. Call me when you can. I'll tell you everything. Stared at that message until the words blurred. Adrian's voice was careful, low. Who is that? Business partner, I said. From before he died. Before we lost the house. You said there was a truth you never told Olivia. Adrian said gently. Is this it? I closed my eyes. I had been so careful for 20 years. So disciplined. I had built an entire version of our family history, one where Robert was a good man who worked hard and made a few unlucky investments, where our financial troubles were simply bad timing, where nobody had done anything wrong. They'd just been unlucky. I had told that story so many times I had almost started to believe it myself. But I had never told Olivia the truth, because the truth would have destroyed the only thing I had left to give her a father worth admiring. I need to call him, I said. Right now, before I lose my nerve. Adrian didn't argue. He simply stood, walked to the window, and gave me the kind of privacy that felt like a gift. I dialed the number at the bottom of the email. Charles picked up on the second ring, like he'd been waiting. Margaret, his voice sounded older than I remembered, rougher. I wondered if you'd call. Tell me, I said. No pleasantries. No small talk. 20 years of politeness had gotten me exactly nowhere. Tell me about the Fairwood account. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, the sound of a man working up the courage to finally say something he should have said 2 decades ago. Robert didn't lose the house because of bad investments, Charles said quietly. He lost it because he took money from a client trust account, Fairwood Development. It was supposed to be short-term. He was going to pay it back before anyone noticed. We'll cover a gap in our cash flow. But the deal he was counting on fell through, and by the time it fell through, he'd already moved almost $60,000 that didn't belong to him. The floor tilted under me. Possible, I whispered, even though some old, buried part of me had known. Some part of me had always known Robert's version of events never quite added up. It's true, Margaret. I helped him cover it. Money between accounts to hide the gap before the audit. We were partners for 18 years. I couldn't let him go to prison. Couldn't let Olivia grow up with her father in a federal courtroom. He exhaled hard. We sold the business assets quietly, settled with Fairwood before they filed charges. It cost us almost everything, and it cost you your house, and Robert let you believe it was market losses. Bad luck, anything but what it actually was. Sat there in a chair in a stranger's kitchen on the other side of the world, and felt 20 years of careful, constructed grief collapse into something much uglier. Why didn't he tell me? I said. My voice came out very small. Because he was ashamed, Charles said. And because you'd have left him. He said that to me once, the year before he died. Margaret ever finds out what I did, she'll take Olivia and go. And I'll lose everything that actually matters. I pressed my hand against my mouth. He was probably right, I whispered. Charles's voice cracked slightly. There's more. I don't know if you want to hear it right now, but I think you need to. Tell me. Olivia knows, he said. She's known for years. Everything in me went cold. What do you mean she knows? She came to see me. Maybe 6 years ago. She'd found something old paperwork in a storage unit, I think. Something with the Fairwood name on it that she didn't understand. She tracked me down and asked me straight out what it meant. He paused. I told her the truth. Margaret. I thought she already half knew. I thought you'd have explained it to her by the guy then. That she was just asking me to fill in details. I didn't realize she'd never heard any of it from you at all. I could not breathe. 6 years, I said. She's known for 6 years. I'm sorry. Charles said. I assumed you knew she knew. I assumed you two had talked about it. If I'd understood she was carrying that alone, believing you'd hidden it from her on purpose all this time. She has been, I said, the pieces slamming into place with sickening speed. She's spent 6 years thinking I lied to her face about her father being a thief, and she never once told me she knew. I'm sorry, Charles said again. And I could hear that he meant it, that this apology had been sitting in him for 6 years, waiting for a phone call he'd hoped would never have to happen. I thanked him. I don't remember what I said exactly. I hung up the phone and sat perfectly still in that chair, feeling the entire shape of the last 6 years of my relationship with my daughter rearrange itself in front of me. Every strange silence at Thanksgiving. Every clipped phone call, every time Olivia had looked at me across a table with that flat, unreadable distance in her eyes, I had told myself it was grief for her father, or the natural drift of adult children, or simply Olivia being Olivia, private and guarded the way she'd always been. It had never once occurred to me that my own daughter believed I was a liar, that she thought I had watched her idolize a father who stole money and said nothing, protected nothing but my own comfort, let her grow up worshiping a man I supposedly knew was capable of theft. She hadn't been punishing me for something I did. She'd been punishing me for something she believed I'd hidden. Adrian came back into the room slowly, reading my face before I said a word. Margaret, he said, just opened up underneath you. Did, I said. I told him everything. Trust account. $60,000. Charles covering the gap. Robert's shame, his silence, the house we lost that I'd let Olivia believe was simply bad luck for 20 years. Part that had knocked the air clean out of my chest, that Olivia had known the truth for 6 years and never once told me she knew. Adrian sat down across from me, his expression grave. She's been grieving a father she thought was a criminal, he said slowly, working through it out loud, while watching you protect his memory instead of telling her the truth. That meant you cared more about his reputation than her feelings. Yes, I said. That's exactly what she assumed. And in the airport, Adrian continued, when she asked you if he was ever unhappy, if he ever wished things had been different, giving me a chance to finally tell her. Well, I said, understanding arriving like a blow. Well, that was her last chance. Well, she was testing me one more time to see if I'd finally be honest. Well, and I told her he had struggles. Well, I gave her the same soft, careful non-answer I'd been giving her for 20 years. Well, and she read that as one more lie. Well, Adrian said quietly. Well, I put my head in my hands. Did this, I said. Well, I know she canceled that flight. I know what she did to me was cruel and calculated and unforgivable in 100 different ways. But I also did this. I built a wall between us with my own 2 hands 20 years ago. And I have spent every year since then wondering why she wouldn't come through a door I never told her existed. Well, Adrian didn't try to comfort me with easy words, and I loved him a little for that, although I wouldn't have called it love yet. Not out loud, not even to myself. You made a choice 20 years ago to protect a dying image of your husband, he said carefully. That was wrong, I think, though I understand exactly why you did it. But Margaret, she still canceled your flight, still took your documents, and left you stranded with $40 in a country where you knew no one. Whatever pain she was carrying does not erase what she did to you 4 days ago. Both things are true at once. I lifted my head and looked at him. Both things are true at once. I repeated slowly, like I was testing the shape of the sentence in my mouth for the first time in my life. Don't think I've ever let myself believe that before. I think I've spent my whole life believing that if I was hurt, I must have done something to deserve it. And if someone else was hurting, that meant I had no right to my own pain at all. That, Adrian said quietly, sounds like a very lonely way to live. It was, I said. It is. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in the guest room Farah had prepared for me on my first night in that house, staring at the ceiling, running the last 20 years backward like a film reel, looking for every place I could have stopped and told my daughter the truth, and hadn't. Robert's funeral, when Olivia had asked me, tearfully, if her father died happy, I'd said yes. Her college graduation, when she'd talked about wanting to make her father proud, and I'd smiled and said nothing. Every single Sunday phone call for 4 years, when she'd circle close to the subject of Robert, and I'd steer us gently, expertly away. I had built a career managing crises for other people. I had walked strangers back from the edge of their own worst decisions in hotel lobbies at 2 in the morning. And I had let my own daughter drown in a silence I created, because I was too afraid of what honesty would cost me. By morning, I had made a decision. I need to go home. I told Adrian over coffee, the light just beginning to come up gray and gold through the tall windows. Not to hide, not to run from any of this. I need to look my daughter in the eye and tell her the truth myself, for the first time in 20 years, instead of letting her hear it secondhand from a man she tracked down in a storage unit parking lot. Adrian nodded slowly. Board meeting is in 6 days, he said. I understand if you need to leave before then, prizing myself with how sure I sounded. I made you a promise. 11 days. I intend to keep it. But after that meeting, I'm going home, and I'm going to finish this the right way. Not running. Ocean anymore. Something in his face shifted pride, maybe, or something quieter and more complicated underneath it. You are, he said slowly, the most remarkable woman I have met in longer than I can remember. I felt heat rise in my face, entirely unexpected, entirely unwelcome, given everything else happening in my chest. Don't, I said softly. Not right now. I don't think I can hold anything else today. Understood, he said. And he let it go, gently, the way he seemed to let everything go without pressure, without demand. But it stayed there between us anyway, quiet and unspoken, all through the 6 days that followed. Those 6 days were the hardest and, strangely, the most alive I had felt in years. I worked with a fury I hadn't felt since my 30s, rebuilding Adrian's Marrakesh proposal from the ground up, defending every number to Priya and two increasingly impressed junior executives, refusing to let a single flawed assumption slide past me. Somewhere in that focused, furious work, a place to put all the grief I couldn't yet look at directly. I sat with Adrian at that long dining table and talked, not about the business, about Robert, about Yasmin. Parallel griefs we were both carrying, mine buried under 2 decades of careful lies, his still raw and recent and unresolved. Yasmin used to say I worked too hard because I was afraid of what I'd feel if I stopped. Adrian told me on the 4th night, turning a coffee cup slowly in his hands. She was right. Of course. She usually was. Robert never told me anything, I said. Not really. Not the things that mattered. I used to think that was just how men of his generation were. Now I wonder if he just didn't trust me enough to survive knowing the truth. Or he didn't trust himself. Adrian said, sometimes the people who lie to us the longest aren't protecting us at all. They're protecting the last version of themselves they can stand to look at in a mirror. Over for a long time after he said it. On the 5th night, sitting on the terrace with the city glittering below us, Adrian reached over and took my hand carefully, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't pull away. I know this is complicated, he said quietly. I know you're about to walk back into the hardest conversation of your life with your daughter. I am not asking you for anything right now, Margaret. I just wanted you to know that whatever happens when you go home, you don't have to go through any of it, feeling like no one sees you. I see you. I looked at our hands, joined together on the small table between us, and felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 4 years since Robert died. Not romance, not yet. Something steadier than that. Something that felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like safety. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing me. The board meeting arrived faster than I expected. Stood at the back of that glass-walled conference room on the 11th day, watching Adrian present the restructured Marrakesh proposal to 11 skeptical faces, watching Malik's smug confidence slowly curdle into confusion as question after questions was answered with numbers that were airtight, defensible, built on real experience instead of borrowed assumptions. Where did these revised staffing projections come from? One board member asked, flipping through the report. These weren't in the original deck. Adrian didn't hesitate. They came from Margaret Ellis, he said, gesturing toward me at the back of the room, who spent 35 years managing hotel properties before I had the good fortune of meeting her 11 days ago. Every number in this revised proposal has been stress-tested against real operational experience, not theoretical models. Every head in that room turned to look at me. Malik's eyes narrowed. Who exactly is Margaret Ellis to this company? A consultant, Adrian said smoothly. And frankly, Malik, the only person in this room who caught the staffing error that would have cost us our reputation in Marrakesh within 6 months. Suggest you thank her instead of questioning her credentials. I watched Malik's face flush red, watched him search for a rebuttal and fail to find one, watched the balance of power in that room shift so decisively that by the time the vote came, his expansion plan was dead, and Adrian's revised proposal passed 9-2. Afterward, in the elevator, Adrian turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, something between triumph and gratitude and a kind of wonder. You just saved my company, he said, and possibly my sanity. You saved my life first, I said. I think we're even. He laughed a real laugh, warm and unguarded, and for just a moment, standing in that elevator with the whole city glittering below us through the glass, I let myself feel something like joy. It didn't last, because that night While packing my bag for the flight home, Adrian had insisted on booking for me first class. Well, no expense spared. Well, a small kindness I'd stopped arguing about days ago. My phone rang. Well, unknown number. Local area code from home. Well, I answered, expecting a spam call. Well, a wrong number. Well, anything ordinary. Well, Mrs. Well, Ellis, a woman's voice. Well, professional. Careful in that particular way that immediately raised the hair on my arms. Well, my name is Detective Sarah Chen, calling from the Franklin County Police Department. Well, I'm trying to reach you regarding a welfare check request filed by your daughter, Olivia Ellis, 4 days ago. Well, my stomach dropped. Well, a welfare check. Well, I repeated slowly. Yes, ma'am. Reported that you may be the victim of undue influence or possible financial exploitation while traveling abroad. Well, she's expressed concern that you may not be, well, in her words, of sound enough mind to be making decisions about extended travel or financial matters at this time. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. Well, detective, well, I said, forcing my voice to stay level, I need you to understand something. Well, I am not confused. Well, I am not being exploited. Well, and in the next few days, well, I am going to be able to prove, with documentation, exactly what my daughter did to me in that airport 11 days ago, and exactly why she might have reason to want people to believe I've lost my mind. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, ma'am, Detective Chen said slowly, well, I think you and I need to have a longer conversation. Because your daughter has also filed paperwork with an elder law attorney requesting an emergency evaluation of your financial competency. The hearing is scheduled for 6 days from now. The room tilted sideways. Olivia wasn't just protecting a secret anymore. She was trying to have her own mother declared incompetent. Stood in that room with the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. And Detective Chen's words sat in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. An emergency evaluation of my financial competency. I'll say that again, well, I said quietly, slowly, because I need to make sure I heard you correctly. Your daughter filed paperwork with an elder law attorney requesting an emergency competency hearing. Well, Detective Chen repeated, patient, professional, clearly used to delivering news that landed like a blow. Filing states concerns about undue influence from a person she describes as a wealthy stranger you met abroad, and requests the court appoint a temporary guardian over your financial affairs pending evaluation. A temporary guardian over my own life. Well, detective, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice came out. Because inside I felt like the floor had opened beneath me and I was standing on nothing at all. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Well, I am 69 years old. Well, I managed hotel properties for 35 years. Well, I balanced million-dollar budgets before my daughter was old enough to balance a checkbook. Well, I am not confused. Well, I am not being exploited. The only person who has taken anything from me on this trip is the daughter who is currently trying to have me declared incompetent. Well, ma'am, I hear you. Well, and for what it's worth, you sound entirely lucid to me, Detective Chen said. But I have to follow procedure on my end. Can you tell me your current location and confirm you're safe? Well, I told her. Well, Adrian's residence. Well, his full name. Well, his company. Well, I gave her Priya's number as a secondary contact. Gave her the name of the hotel where I'd first been checked in. Gave her every detail I could think of to build a wall of documented, verifiable truth around myself. Well, I'll note all of that, she said. Well, and Mrs. Well, Ellis, the hearing is in 6 days. You can be back in the country before then, with any documentation supporting your version of events. I'd strongly encourage you to be present. These hearings can move forward without the subject present if the court believes there's sufficient cause for concern. You do not want that happening in your absence. 6 days. Well, I hung up the phone and stood there, staring at nothing, feeling something in my chest that I almost didn't recognize because I hadn't felt it in so long. Not grief. Not fear. Rage. Clean, focused, purposeful rage. Adrian found me still standing there 10 minutes later, my suitcase half packed on the bed beside me, my hands trembling not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding something enormous inside my body without letting it break me apart. Margaret, his voice was careful. What happened? I told him. Every word. I watched his face change from concern to something harder, something I hadn't seen in him before, a kind of controlled fury that reminded me, strangely, of myself in that moment. She's trying to have you declared incompetent, he repeated slowly, like he needed to say it out loud to believe it. After abandoning you in an airport, after stealing your documents. She is trying to convince a court that you are the danger. She's protecting herself, I said. If a judge decides I'm not of sound mind, then nothing I say about that airport matters. Nothing I say about Robert matters. Nothing I say about any of it matters. Because I'll just be a confused old woman making things up. That will not happen, Adrian said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before, not comfort, not softness, something like a promise carved in stone. Margaret, look at me. That will not happen. You don't control a courtroom in Ohio, I said, and I heard the fear finally crack through the rage in my own voice. Neither do I, apparently, anymore, according to my own daughter. No, he agreed. But I control resources, and I have spent 30 years learning how to move quickly when something matters enough. You are not walking into that hearing alone, and you are not walking into it with nothing but your word against hers. Phone before I could argue and started making calls. The next 6 days became the fastest, strangest, most disorienting stretch of my entire life. Adrian's legal team, 3 sharp, fast-moving attorneys who normally handled hotel acquisitions and international contracts, pivoted overnight into building a case file that would have made a criminal prosecutor proud, pulled the airport security footage and had it certified, translated, and notarized within 48 hours, pulled the flight cancellation records showing the timestamp, 11 minutes before our argument, proving premeditation beyond any reasonable doubt. I sat with Priya for 6 straight hours on the second day, going through every financial document. I owned my modest retirement account, my small savings, a deed to my apartment, organizing it all into a binder so thorough, so meticulously labeled, that even I was impressed by the woman who had apparently, at some point in the last 35 years, learned to build an airtight paper trail. Did this professionally. Didn't you, sir? Priya said, flipping through the tabs I'd created. This is better organized than half the executive reports I see at work. I ran hotels for 35 years, I said. You learn to document everything, because someone is always trying to sue you for something. She laughed, but there was real respect underneath it. Your daughter has no idea what she's up against, does she? I thought about that for a long moment. No, I said slowly. I don't think she does. I don't think she has any idea who I actually am. Because I spent so many years making myself small for her sake that she genuinely believes the smallness is the whole of me. On the 3rd night, unable to sleep, I finally called Charles Whitfield back. I need something from you. I told him. Everything you told me. Sign it. Have it notarized if you can. I need proof that Robert took that money, that you covered it, and that Olivia came to you 6 years ago asking questions. There was a long pause on the line. Are you sure you want to do this? Charles asked quietly. Once it's written down, once it's official, there's no taking it back. Robert's name has already cost me everything it's going to cost me, I said. I spent 20 years protecting a dead man's reputation while my daughter tried to have me declared insane. I am done protecting anyone but myself. All right, Charles said, and I heard something like relief in his voice. The sound of a man finally allowed to put down a weight he'd carried too long. I'll have it ready by tomorrow. On the fourth day, something happened that I hadn't expected, something that cracked the whole situation open in a direction none of us saw coming. I was sitting at Adrian's dining table, half buried in documents, when Priya came in, holding her laptop with an expression I'd learned to recognize. Over the past 2 weeks, the look she got when she'd found something important. Margaret, she said, I think you need to see this. She turned the laptop toward me. It was a public records search property records, specifically for a house in Westerville, Ohio. My old house, the one we'd lost when Olivia was 15, the one I had told her for 20 years we'd lost to bad market timing, cross-referencing the Fairwood settlement documents Mr. Whitfield sent over, Priya explained, trying to build the full financial timeline for the court filing. And I found this. She pointed to a name on the current deed, Olivia Ellis. My daughter owned my old house. That's not possible, I said, staring at the screen. Sold that house in 2004. To strangers. I remember the closing. Sold it to strangers in 2004, Priya confirmed. But it changed hands again in 2019. Olivia purchased it. Paid cash. No mortgage on record. Sat back in my chair, feeling something shift and rearrange inside my chest for what felt like the 100th time in 2 weeks. Why would she buy back the house we lost? I said slowly, and never once mention it to me. Who had been reading over my shoulder, went very quiet. Margaret, he said carefully, what if she wasn't trying to reclaim a happy memory? What if she was investigating, building her own case file, the same way you're building yours right now, except 6 years ahead of you, and completely alone, with no one to help her make sense of what she found? Thought landed in me like a stone dropped into still water, spreading out in slow, cold rings. She bought the house to understand what actually happened there, I said, working it through out loud. Quietly digging into her father's finances for years, piecing together the same story I just heard from Charles. And she did it entirely by herself, believing the whole time that I already knew and had simply chosen never to tell her. That would explain the anger, Adrian said quietly. Not just anger at what he did, anger that she had to discover it alone, piece by piece, while watching you tell everyone a comfortable lie. I put my head in my hands. 6 years, I said. 6 years of watching me defend a version of her father that she knew, with documentation, was false. 6 years of me thinking she was just distant, just busy, just Olivia being Olivia. And she was carrying this the entire time. It doesn't excuse what she did to you in that airport, Adrian said firmly, and I could hear him choosing his words with the same care he'd used the first night, refusing to let one truth erase another. Whatever pain she's been carrying, it does not give her the right to strand her 69-year-old mother alone in a foreign country, and then try to have her declared mentally incompetent. Both things remain true. Margaret, let this discovery talk you out of protecting yourself. I won't, I said. And I meant it. Something had shifted in me. Nonetheless, the rage had not disappeared. But underneath it now sat something heavier, something sadder, something that looked almost exactly like grief for the family I might have had if I'd simply told the truth 20 years ago, instead of trying to protect a dead man's memory. On the 5th day, I finally worked up the courage to call Olivia directly. Adrian offered to stay in the room. I asked him to give me privacy, and he did, without argument. closing the door softly behind him and leaving me alone at that long table with nothing but my phone and 20 years of unspoken things. Well, she answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was guarded, tight, ready for a fight. Well, I know about the house, I said. Well, no preamble. Well, no softening. Well, I was done softening things for her comfort. Well, I know you bought back the Westerville house in 2019. I know you talked to Charles Whitfield 6 years ago. I know you've known about the Fairwood account for 6 years, Olivia, and you never once told me you knew. Well, silence stretched out on the line, long enough that I thought she might have hung up. How long have you known that I knew? Well, she finally asked. Well, and her voice had changed smaller, less armored than I'd heard it in years. 4 days, I said. Adrian's team found the property records while building my case for the competency hearing you filed against me. Well, another silence, heavier this time. I didn't know how to tell you I found out, well, Olivia said, and I heard something crack in her voice, something old and raw finally coming loose. Well, I found those papers in a storage unit after Dad died. Well, I was looking for his old law degree, something sentimental for a scrapbook I was making. Well, and instead, I found bank statements with numbers that didn't make sense. Months trying to understand it before I finally worked up the courage to track down Charles. Well, and when he told you the truth, well, I said quietly, you decided I already knew. You decided I'd been lying to you your entire life. What was I supposed to think? Well, Mom, her voice cracked fully now, 20 years of held-back grief spilling out at once. You were his wife. You handled the finances. You told me for years he lost the house on a bad investment, that it was just bad luck, that he was a good man who made one unlucky bet. And the whole time you knew he stole money. You knew. And you let me grow up thinking he was some kind of hero who just had bad timing. Well, I didn't know, I said, and my own voice broke now. All the discipline of finally failing me. Well, Olivia, I swear to you, well, I did not know until 4 days ago. Your father hid it from me, too. I found out the exact same way you did. I called Charles, well, and he told me everything. Well, and I have spent every hour since then trying to understand how I lived with a man for 30 years and never saw who he actually was. Well, there was a long, ragged silence. Olivia repeated slowly, like she was testing whether she could believe it. Well, I didn't know, I said. Well, I swear on your life. Well, Olivia, I did not know. Well, I thought we lost the house to bad investments because that's what your father told me. I built the rest of the story myself, over the years, because it was easier than admitting I didn't actually know why the man I married for 30 years suddenly needed to sell everything we owned. I heard her breathing change on the other end of the line, quick, uneven, the sound of someone trying not to cry and failing. Well, I've hated you for 6 years, she whispered. I've hated you for something you didn't even know about. You've hated me, I said slowly. And instead of asking me one single question, you spent 6 years building a case against me in silence. And 2 weeks ago, instead of finally telling me the truth, you canceled my flight home and left me stranded in a foreign country with $40. Was different from the others. Heavier. Final, in a way. I know, Olivia said. And her voice was very small now. I know what I did. Known it was wrong since the moment I walked away from that gate. Mom. I panicked. I saw you standing there, so calm, so composed, the same way you've always been. And something in me just broke. 20 years of watching you be perfectly fine while I fell apart alone with a secret I couldn't tell anyone. And I wanted, just once, to see you as lost and scared as I've felt for 6 years. So you made me lost and scared, I said quietly. On purpose, to prove a point. Yes, she admitted. And the honesty of it, the sheer bluntness after 2 weeks of lies and half-truths, hit me harder than any excuse could have. I did. And it was wrong. It was so wrong. Well, Mom, and I've known it every single day since. I didn't know how to undo it. So instead, I made it worse. People, you wandered off. Well, I told Linda you seemed confused. I told an attorney I was worried about your competency. Well, because if you were confused, well, then maybe what I did wasn't as bad. Maybe I wasn't a monster who abandoned her elderly mother in a foreign airport. Well, maybe I was just a worried daughter trying to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. Well, I can protect myself, well, I said, and something fierce and clean rose up in my chest as I said it. Something I had needed to say for a very long time. I've always been able to protect myself, Olivia. Well, I chose not to, for years. Well, because I thought that's what a good mother does. She disappears into the needs of everyone around her and calls it love. Well, but I am not confused. Well, I am not incompetent. Well, I am the woman who has spent the last 2 weeks saving a hotel corporation from a boardroom coup. Well, and I did it with a phone I had to charge on a stranger's cable and $40 in my wallet. Olivia was crying openly now, and some old, exhausted part of me wanted to comfort her the way I always had, to smooth this over, to tell her it was all right. Well, we'd figure it out together. Well, I didn't. Well, the hearing is in 2 days. Well, I said instead. Well, I am flying home tomorrow. Well, I will be there, well, in person, well, with documentation of everything, the airport footage, well, the cancellation timestamp, well, Charles's sworn statement about the Fairwood account, well, all of it. Well, I am not doing this to punish you, Olivia. Well, I am doing this because I refuse to spend one more day of my life being smaller than I am so someone else can feel bigger. You're going to fight the petition, Olivia said quietly. Well, I'm going to withdraw it, I said. Or a judge is going to throw it out, publicly, with all of that evidence in the record. Which outcome happens is entirely up to you. Well, I heard her take a long, shuddering breath. Well, I'll withdraw it, she said. Well, Mom, I'll withdraw it. Well, I swear, I never should have filed it in the first place. Well, I was scared and angry, and I didn't think it through. Well, I know, I said. Well, I believe you. Well, but I am still coming home, well, and we are still going to sit down together, well, in person, and finish this conversation the right way. Not over a phone, well, not in an airport, well, face to face, like the 2 adult women we actually are. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Mom. Well, I'll be there. Well, I hung up the phone and sat alone at that long table for a long time, feeling something in my chest that I couldn't quite name, not relief, well, not forgiveness, not yet. Something more like the exhausted stillness after a storm has finally passed through. Adrian came back in a few minutes later, reading my face the way he'd learned to do over these 2 extraordinary weeks. Well, she's withdrawing the petition, well, I told him. Good, he said simply. Well, then, after a pause, well, how do you feel? Thought about that question honestly. For the first time in longer than I could remember, actually thinking about how I felt instead of how I was supposed to feel. Well, exhausted, I said. Well, angry. Well, sad. Well, relieved. All of it at once. Well, somehow, none of it canceling out the others. Well, I looked up at him. Don't think I forgive her yet. Well, I don't think I'm ready to. Well, but I don't hate her either, well, which surprises me, well, given everything. That sounds honest, well, Adrian said. Trust that over easy forgiveness any day. Well, I almost smiled. You have a habit of saying exactly the right thing, of having lived through enough wrong things to recognize what the right thing sounds like, he said. Wisdom, Margaret. Well, it's scar tissue. Well, we sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the last 2 weeks settling slowly around us like dust after a long fall. Well, I need to go home tomorrow, well, I said eventually. Not just for the hearing. I need to see her face when we finally have this conversation. Well, I need to look my daughter in the eye and tell her I'm sorry for the 20 years of silence. Well, and I need her to look me in the eye and tell me she's sorry for the airport. Well, and I need both of those things to happen in the same room. at the same time, without a phone or an ocean between us. I understand, Adrian said. And then, more quietly, I'll miss having you in this house. I want you to know that. Whatever happens next, however this settles, I want you to know these 2 weeks have meant something to me that I did not expect them to mean when I handed you a cup of coffee in an airport. I reached over and took his hand, the way he'd taken mine on that terrace 5 nights earlier. It meant something to me, too, I said. I came to Dubai believing my life was mostly behind me, that whatever I had left to give the world, I'd already given it. You have spent 2 weeks proving me wrong about that, Adrian, and I don't know quite what to do with the fact that I'm 69 years old and I feel, for the first time in years, like my life might actually be beginning instead of winding down. Then don't do anything with it yet, he said gently. Go home. Finish what you need to finish with your daughter. And when you're ready, however long that takes, I will still be here. I flew home the next morning on a plane that felt entirely different from the one that had carried me to Dubai 2 weeks earlier. I sat in first class, a seat Adrian had insisted on booking despite my protests. And I looked out the window at the clouds and thought about the woman who had boarded a plane in the opposite direction 2 weeks ago, quiet, careful, endlessly accommodating, so afraid of taking up space that she had spent 69 years making herself smaller and smaller until an airport kiosk very nearly erased her completely. That woman was gone. Didn't know exactly who had replaced her yet, but I knew she wasn't going to spend the rest of her life apologizing for existing. I landed at 9 in the morning, cleared customs with the notarized binder of documents Priya had helped me prepare tucked carefully in my carry-on, and took a taxi directly to the county courthouse instead of home, because the hearing, even with Olivia's promise to withdraw the petition, was scheduled for that same afternoon. And I was not going to risk anything by assuming a phone call was enough to undo what had already been filed. I sat in a hard plastic chair in a courthouse hallway that felt, in its own bureaucratic way, remarkably similar to the airport chair where all of this had begun. And I waited. Olivia walked through the double doors at the end of the hallway. She looked different than I remembered. Thinner, maybe, or just more tired. Her eyes found mine across that long hallway, and for a moment neither of us moved. 2 women standing on opposite ends of 20 years of silence. Both of us finally, terrifyingly, out of places to hide. Then she started walking toward me, and I stood up to meet her halfway. She stopped a few feet from me, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. 20 years of silence doesn't just end because 2 people finally decide to stand in the same hallway. Mom, she said finally. Her voice cracked on the single syllable. I'm here, I said. Like I told you I would be. Her eyes filled, and she pressed her lips together, fighting it, the way she'd fought every uncomfortable emotion since she was a teenager. I used to think that was strength. Standing there in that courthouse hallway, I understood it for what it actually was. Fear dressed up as composure. I recognized it because I had worn the same costume for most of my life. I withdrew the petition this morning, she said. Before I even landed here, I called the attorney. It's done, Mom. Off the docket. You don't have to go in there and fight anything. I know, I said. Clerk confirmed it when I checked in. But I'm still glad I came. She looked at the binder tucked under my arm, Priya's careful tabs, Charles's notarized statement, the certified airport footage, and something crossed her face that looked almost like shame. You brought evidence anyway, she said quietly. Even after I told you I'd withdrawn it. 35 years learning that promises and paperwork are 2 different things, I said. I wasn't going to risk my own life on the difference. Not this time. She flinched, but she didn't argue. I think some part of her respected it, even as it stung. Well, can we go somewhere? Well, she asked. Somewhere that isn't a courthouse hallway. Well, I think we have a lot to say to each other. I don't want to say any of it standing next to a water fountain. Well, I thought about it for a moment. I would have said yes immediately, well, out of habit, well, out of that old reflex to make things easy for her. Well, there's a diner 2 blocks from here. Well, I said instead. Well, public. Well, neutral. Somewhere I can leave whenever I decide I've had enough. Something flickered in her eyes' surprise. Well, maybe at the boundary, or recognition that the boundary was necessary. Well, okay, she said. Well, that's fair. Well, we sat across from each other in a booth by the window, 2 cups of coffee going cold between us. Well, and for a long moment neither of us knew how to begin. 20 years of unspoken things don't organize themselves neatly just because you've finally decided to speak them. Well, I want to start, Olivia said finally, well, by saying I'm sorry. Well, not the way I said it on the phone. Well, not rushed. Well, not scared. Well, not trying to undo a court filing. Well, I am sorry, Mom, for the airport. Well, for what I did to you there. For every single hour you spent alone and afraid because of a choice I made. Well, I studied her face, looking for the flatness I'd seen at that kiosk. Well, the terrifying calm. Well, it wasn't there. What was there instead looked like someone finally, fully awake to what she'd done. Well, tell me why, I said. Well, not the 6-year version. Well, not the buried resentment. I need to understand the exact moment you decided to do it. What was happening in your head in that line. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup like she needed something to hold on to. I watched you argue with me about seats, well, she said slowly. Well, and you were so calm, well, so reasonable. Well, explaining your hip, well, explaining the booking, well, being perfectly, infuriatingly composed, well, the way you've always been composed about everything, well, even things that should have broken you. Something in me just snapped. I thought she's never going to feel what I feel. Well, she's never going to be as lost as I've been for 6 years. And in that moment, well, some ugly, small part of me decided I wanted her to. Well, so you made me lost, well, I said quietly. Well, on purpose, to make me understand something you'd never actually told me. Well, yes, she said. Well, and her voice broke on the word. Well, and the second I walked through security, the second I was out of sight, well, I regretted it instantly. Well, but I didn't turn around. Well, because turning around meant admitting what I'd done. Well, and I was too much of a coward to face that. Well, you were a coward for 2 weeks, I said. Well, not just in that airport. Every day after. When you told Linda I'd wandered off. Every day you let people believe I was confused instead of admitting you'd stranded me. Every hour you spent building a legal case to have me declared incompetent instead of picking up the phone and telling me the truth. Didn't defend herself. Well, she just nodded, tears sliding down freely now. Well, and let me say it. I need you to understand something. Well, I continued, my voice steady even as my chest ached with every word. What you did in that airport could have gotten me killed. Olivia, well, I am 69 years old. Well, I had no money. Well, no phone, no documents. Well, in a country where I didn't speak the language. If Adrian Khalil hadn't happened to be sitting in that terminal with 2 cups of coffee and nowhere pressing to be, well, I don't know what would have happened to me. I could have been robbed. Well, hurt. Well, I could have simply disappeared. And you would have told everyone I wandered off, well, confused, and no one would have looked very hard for a 69-year-old widow who'd embarrassed her successful daughter in an airport. Well, I know, she whispered, every single night for 2 weeks. What could have happened? Well, what I risked. Well, good, I said. Well, I want you to keep thinking about it. Well, not to punish yourself forever, Olivia. Well, but because I need to know that you understand the actual weight of what you did. Well, not just the version where it worked out fine because a wealthy stranger happened to be kind. She was quiet for a long moment, well, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. Well, can I ask you something now, she said. Well, about Dad. Well, I felt my whole body brace. Well, yes, I said. Well, did you really not know? Well, her voice was small, well, almost pleading. Well, about the money. Well, about Fairwood. Well, please tell me the truth. Well, Mom, because I have spent six hating you for something, and I need to know if I've been hating you for the right reason or the wrong one. Well, I reached across the table and, well, for the first time in longer than I could remember, took my daughter's hand without her having to ask for it. Well, I did not know, I said, holding her eyes, so she could see there was nothing hidden behind mine. Your father told me we lost the house because of a bad investment in a commercial property that fell through. Well, I believed that story for 20 years, Olivia. Well, I believed it because I wanted to believe it. Well, because the alternative that the man I married, well, the man I built a life with, well, had stolen money from a client and let us lose everything to cover it up, was too painful to consider. Well, when Charles told me the truth 2 weeks ago in Dubai, it broke something in me, too. Every night since then, rewriting 30 years of marriage in my head, trying to figure out how I missed it. You didn't miss it, Olivia said softly. He hid it. Well, Charles told me that too, eventually, when I pushed him hard enough. Dad was good at hiding things. We both learned that skill from watching him, whether we meant to or not. That landed harder than I expected. Well, what do you mean? I asked. I mean, I've been hiding things from you for 6 years, she said. Well, the same way he hid things from you for years before that. I told myself I was protecting you from more pain. But really, well, I think I was just protecting myself from the conversation we're having right now. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling the strange, uncomfortable truth of it settle over both of us. Well, we come from a family of people who love each other by hiding things. Well, I said slowly. Your father hid his shame to protect his pride. Well, I hid the truth about your father to protect his memory. Hid what you knew to protect yourself from having to confront me. None of us ever once considered that the hiding itself was the thing doing the damage. Olivia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't want to do that anymore, she said. Well, I'm so tired of it, Mom. I'm 42 years old and I've spent half my adult life either angry at you for something you didn't do or too scared to tell you what I actually knew. I don't want to keep living like this. Well, neither do I said. But wanting something different and actually building it are two different things, Olivia. Understand that I'm not simply going to forget what happened in that airport because we're having an honest conversation over coffee. Trust isn't rebuilt in an afternoon. Well, I know, she said. Well, I'm not asking for that. Well, I'm asking for a chance to earn it back. Well, however long that takes. Well, we sat in that diner for almost 3 hours. I want to tell you it was easy after that first honest exchange. Once the truth was finally on the table, everything softened smoothly into forgiveness. It wasn't like that. Well, there were long silences. Well, there were moments Olivia got defensive again. Well, old habits rising up out of exhaustion and shame. Well, and I had to remind her, gently but firmly, that defensiveness wasn't going to work with me anymore. There was one moment, about 2 hours in, when she asked me about Adrian, really asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Who is he? She asked. To you, I mean. I read the name in the court, filing my attorney prepared. A wealthy businessman you met in an airport. I'll admit, when I first heard it, it sounded exactly like the kind of story that would make anyone worried. Well, I understand why it sounded that way, I said. Well, but he's not what you're imagining. He's a widower. He lost his wife 2 years ago. He saw a woman crying alone in an airport, and he remembered his own wife going through something similar once, years before she died, and nobody helping her. So he helped me instead. Well, and now, Olivia asked carefully. Well, I thought about the terrace, the hand on the table. Steady way he'd looked at me and said, I see you. Well, now I don't entirely know. Well, I said honestly. But I know that for the first time in years, someone looked at me and saw a whole person instead of a role. A mother, a widow, someone's caretaker. He saw Margaret, just Margaret. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Olivia was quiet for a moment, studying me in a way that felt different than it had. At the beginning of the conversation, less guarded, more genuinely curious. You look different, she said finally. I noticed it the second I saw you in that hallway. You're standing differently. Differently. I don't know how to explain it exactly. I think, I said slowly, for the first time in my adult life, I stopped making myself smaller to fit into the space other people left for me. Dubai didn't give me that. Showed me I'd already lost it a long time ago, piece by piece, without ever noticing. We didn't fix everything in that diner. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this one too often pretend that one long conversation heals 20 years of damage, and that isn't true. And it isn't fair to anyone listening who's living through something similar right now. What we did was start. Over the following weeks, Olivia and I began seeing each other regularly, not the careful, performative Sunday phone calls we'd had for years, but real conversations, sometimes difficult ones, sometimes ones that ended with one of us needing space before we could try again. She came to therapy with me twice, at my request, because I told her plainly that I wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship built on the same silence that had broken it in the first place. She told me things I hadn't known, about the years she'd spent staring at old bank statements in a storage unit, doing math that didn't add up, terrified of what she might find. About the night she finally worked up the courage to call Charles, and how she'd sat in her car afterward for 2 hours, unable to drive, unable to process what she'd learned. About the years of silent resentment that had calcified into something she no longer even recognized as grief, because it had been buried so long under anger that she'd forgotten the anger was ever protecting something softer underneath. I told her things, too. About the early years of our marriage, when Robert had been kind and funny and full of plans, before whatever pressure eventually broke something in him. The exact moment I'd realized, standing in a lawyer's office in 2004, that we were losing the house, and the strange, numb calm that had come over me, the same calm, I realized later, that I'd carried into that airport in Dubai. The calm of a woman who has learned that falling apart doesn't fix anything, so she simply doesn't allow herself to fall apart at all. I think I inherited that from you, Olivia said, during one of those later conversations. The calm, except mine curdled into something else. Yours just made you disappear a little more each year. We're going to have to teach each other a different way, I said. Because I don't think either version worked very well. She almost smiled at that. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in longer than I could remember. Adrian and I spoke almost every day after I returned home. Long calls, some of them lasting hours, bridging the distance between Ohio and Dubai with a patience neither of us had expected to find in each other. He told me about Malik's quiet, humiliated retreat from the board after the Marrakesh proposal passed, about the way the other board members had started treating him differently, with the kind of respect that comes not from grief-softened sympathy, but from watching a man prove, decisively, he was exactly as capable as he'd ever been. Stopped whispering about whether I've lost my instincts. He told me one night, 3 weeks after I'd left Dubai. They're asking whether I might consider bringing on a permanent consultant with hospitality experience. Someone who understands operations at a level none of my executives do. Are you fishing for something? Adrian Khalil, I asked, and I could hear the smile in my own voice. Something I hadn't expected to feel this easily, this soon. I might be, he admitted. Although I want to be honest with you about something else first. Well, Margaret, because I think you deserve honesty more than almost anyone I've ever known. Well, I'm not simply offering you a job. Thought about you every day since you flew home. Well, I think about that terrace, well, and your hand in mine. Well, and I find myself wondering what our lives might look like if the distance between us weren't quite so literal. Well, I sat with that for a long moment, well, feeling something warm and terrifying bloom in my chest, well, the kind of feeling I hadn't allowed myself since long before Robert died. Well, maybe long before Robert and I had even started drifting apart in ways I'd spent years refusing to name. Well, I'm not ready to make any big decisions, well, I said honestly, still rebuilding trust with. I have a life I'm still figuring out how to live differently than I lived it for the last 69 years. Fold myself into someone else's plans right now. Well, Adrian, not even yours. Well, not even as gently as you're offering them. I'm not asking you to fold yourself into anything, he said. Well, I've had quite enough in my own life of people disappearing into other people's plans. I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me be a part of whatever you're building instead. Well, however slowly, well, however far away for now. Well, I told him yes. Promise of anything larger, not yet. Well, just a yes to the slow, well, patient work of letting someone in without losing myself in the process. Something I was still learning how to do at 69 years old. Well, one careful day at a time. Months after that day in the airport, well, I flew back to Dubai, this time with a return ticket firmly, well, unshakably in my own name, well, booked and paid for by me. Well, a small, deliberate act of reclaiming something that had once been stolen from me in that exact same city. Adrian met me at the airport himself this time. Well, no driver, well, no assistant. Just him standing at arrivals with a small, hopeful smile that made him look, well, for a moment, well, much younger than his 70 years. You came back, he said. Well, I told you I would, I said. Well, once I was ready. Stood there in that airport, the same kind of airport, an ocean away from the one where everything had fallen apart. Well, and somehow, well, impossibly, everything had also begun. Well, I had accepted his offer by then. Well, not the job first, well, and not the relationship first, but both together, slowly, in the way that things built to last are always built carefully, with attention, without rushing past the hard parts just to reach the comfortable ones. Well, I became a permanent consultant to his company, splitting my time between Ohio and Dubai, building the program I dreamed up during those first frantic days of work at his dining table, a mentorship initiative that trained older women who'd been pushed out of the workforce or had simply stopped believing anyone still wanted their experience, and placed them in real positions across his hotel properties. We called it the Ellis Fellowship, although I'd resisted the name for weeks before finally, humbly, letting Adrian win that particular argument. Within a year, we had 40 women in the program. Women in their 60s and 70s who had spent decades being told, implicitly or explicitly, that their usefulness had an expiration date. I watched them walk into their first shifts nervous and apologetic, the exact way I had once walked into Adrian's dining room believing I had nothing left to offer anyone. And I watched them leave those first shifts standing straighter, speaking louder, remembering what it felt like to matter to something larger than the small, careful lives they'd folded themselves into. Well, Olivia flew out to see the program in its first year, stood in the lobby of the flagship property, watching a 68-year-old former teacher named Dorothy train a group of 20-something staff members on hospitality standards with a confidence that filled the entire room. And I saw something shift in my daughter's face. "You built this," she said quietly, turning to me. "You built something that helps women exactly like you." "I built it because of everything," I said. If none of it had happened, the airport, Adrian, all of it, I'd probably still be sitting in my apartment in Ohio, watering my plants, telling myself a small life was enough. losing everything to remember I was allowed to want more. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. "Well, I'm proud of you," she said finally. I felt those 4 words land somewhere deep and old in my chest, a place that had been waiting to hear them for longer than either of us had realized. "I don't think I've ever said that to you before. Well, not once in my whole life. Proud of you, Mom." I let myself cry then, right there in that lobby, in front of Dorothy and the young staff and Adrian standing quietly a few feet, giving us the space to have this moment without intruding on it. "Well, thank you," I said, when I could finally speak again. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that." "Well, I know," she said. "I'm sorry it took me 42 years and an abandoned airport to say it. Well, I think about that day at the kiosk often, not with the sharp, cutting pain it used to carry, but with something closer to strange gratitude, the kind you only earn on the far side of real suffering. Well, I think about the version of myself who stood there with $40 and no documents, believing her life was effectively over, believing that whatever value she'd once had to offer the world had already been spent. Well, that woman had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that abandonment would become the doorway to the truest reinvention of her entire life. She had no idea that a stranger's kindness in an airport terminal would lead not just to rescue, but to purpose a program that would eventually help hundreds of women remember their own worth. Well, a relationship built slowly and honestly instead of quickly and desperately. Well, and a daughter who would, well, eventually, learn to say the words "I'm proud of you" and mean them completely. If you are sitting somewhere right now, in whatever city you're watching this from, feeling forgotten by the people who were supposed to protect you, feeling like your usefulness has an expiration date, like the best years are already behind you, like being left behind means being finished, I need you to hear this clearly, because it is the truest thing I know. You are not finished. Being left behind is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is simply the ending of a chapter you were never meant to stay in. People who cannot see your worth are not proof that your worth doesn't exist, that you have outgrown the room they tried to keep you in. Well, I was 69 years old, standing alone in a foreign airport with nothing left but my own resilience. And I built an entirely new life from that single, terrifying moment. Not because I was special, not because a wealthy stranger happened to be kind, although I will be grateful for Adrian Khalil until the day I die. Built that new life because somewhere underneath 69 years of making myself smaller, I still had a whole self waiting to be found. Well, you do too. It is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to demand the truth, to walk away from the silence that's been slowly erasing you, to build something new out of the very moment that was supposed to break you completely. Well, my name is Margaret Ellis. My daughter left me in an airport with $40 and no way home, to be the beginning of the best years of my entire life.